Kris Christmann, you've been doing a lot of research very recently about hate crime, in fact over some period of time now.
Yeah.
One of the main elements that comes out of your research is that very few people report hate crime. Why is that?
That's a good question, and the answer is there's a number of different reasons. There's been a series of victimisation surveys, and what those findings tell us is there's two principal reasons for non-reporting. The first is, and this really comes from the BCS data, people perceive that what occurred was either too trivial, there was no real loss involved, or they didn't believe the police would be interested or bothered about them making a report. And that's probably, in certain terms of the BCS, it's probably just over half of respondents tell us that. And that sort of, the reasons for non-reporting for hate crime tend to mirror the reasons for volume crime more generally. However, for volume crime, it's higher than that. It's roughly about 3/4 of people tell us that it was too trivial, they really couldn't be bothered. The other main reason is it's a common occurrence, and again, they feel they don't want to report it because of that. More generally, and again, this holds for volume crime as well, and it's not particular to hate crime, there's two principal determinants of reporting crime. And the first is severity and the second is frequency. So the more serious the offence, the more serious in terms of what happens regards sort of pain or injury to the victim and or loss suffered, the more likely they are to report the offence. Also in terms of frequency, if something's happening a lot and the individual or the group is identifiable, and that's crucially important, then the individual is much more likely to report report what occurred, and generally, of course, the key reporting agency is the police. The other reasons really around, and these are kind of come down into more sort of single figures, is people either believe that it's a personal matter, something they deal with themselves, also fear of reprisals, that's quite important, convenience of reporting. What we found is, and very crudely, people undertake a cost-benefit calculation with regards to the decision to report. And there are costs involved for the individual in terms of time and effort, which probably explains some of the reasons why people are reluctant to report in the first place. Those are the key messages from the victimisation survey data. However, if you drill down into that data and start disaggregating some of those categories, certainly in terms of the British Crime Survey data, and these aren't published figures, I kind of got these figures from the authors. Some of those reasons have quite a lot to do with the key reporting agency being the police. So what you find is that there's a perception that the police couldn't have done anything about the report, and that's generally either because the person can't identify the individual or that it was sort of a bit of a random occurrence. And that's roughly about sort of 30% of respondents. But also that the police wouldn't have been bothered. The perception of the victim is that the police wouldn't be bothered or wouldn't be concerned about them making the report.
And is that the case? From you must have spoke to the police in your research. Is that perception true? Are the police not bothered, or is it a case of that there's so much of it they have to be very careful how they prioritise what they deal with?
A number of different things. I don't think it's not the case that the police can't be bothered. Ever since the Lawrence reforms, there's been a direction of policy travel which has been about improving that type of service to victims, and also taking away some of the police discretion as well regards whether an incident is deemed to be a crime or not. The policy is to take those initial incidents very seriously. Now, clearly it's difficult to have impact on someone that believes it's a personal matter and that they want to deal with that with themselves, either because it involves someone they know or they don't want to get them involved in the criminal justice system or a family member or such like. But clearly some of the other reasons that involves perceptions of the reporting agency, perceptions of the police, is more amenable to change. I mean, some of the other sort of single figure responses we find from the victimisation survey data is, and these are lower figures, is that there's a kind of a dislike or a distrust of the police, or people have had bad experiences with the police and the criminal justice system more generally as well. However, if you scale those figures up, we're actually talking about quite a considerable number of people. And of course, when you disaggregate the data in terms of the different victimisation groups, in terms of the different equality strands, those groups that have traditionally been victimised, such as lesbian, gay, transgenders, community, racial groups, and all the others, there has been some, I think it's fair to say, long-standing hostilities between, the relationships haven't always been great between themselves and the police. For instance, some of our work down in Suffolk looked at the gypsy and traveller community down there, and there's a particular reluctance to report to the police. And again, that does relate back to those sort of traditional issues about trust and confidence in the police. Although interestingly, for that population, what we found was, and this was something true for the wider population, but specific to the gypsy and traveller community, was that we often found that other family members and friends tended to dissuade them from reporting.
But the police, they take it seriously from day one, and they take it
that's
from
the
there. It depends on the level of the crime.
That's the policy. Of course, in terms of the policy transfer, and because the police are a very large organisation, it's very hierarchical, and there's lots of different police forces around the country. I mean, our perception of Suffolk was, in terms of Suffolk and Sudbury, they were, we think, when in terms of estimating the prevalence of hate crime in Suffolk, we found that the reporting structures were pretty good. I mean, it's clear to us that Suffolk were probably doing a better job regards trying to encourage reporting than their nearest family group of other police forces. I mean, there's been some work done to sort of compare different forces, and they're clustered into different groups that allow meaningful comparisons between those groups. Nevertheless, if you look at the sort of more national picture, and the BCS data looks at the national picture, what we find is, and another work sort of, there was a victim support research project done, I think it was in 2005, which indicated that roughly 3/4 of victims were in some senses unhappy with their contact with the police in terms of reporting hate crime. And those types of issues are concerning. I mean, we know from previous research that trust and confidence in the police tends to go down and tends to find it difficult to survive that first contact. Now, there's lots of different reasons why that is. And certainly, again, in terms of our own work, what we tend to find is that possibly victims have unrealistic expectations about the service they're going to deliver from they're going to get from the police. Regards, people tend to want a response which involves catching and convicting the offender. That's just not always possible. So you know, there's some work to be done by the police in terms of managing those expectations. But conversely, I also think that the police are faced with a rather nasty problem. You know, clearly amongst some of these groups, they need to improve trust and confidence. Now, sure, that work's been ongoing and is still progressing. You know, police have specific liaison officers which undertake that type of work. They have specific hate crime leads as well, as does ACPO, and they have different reporting methods as well, in addition to sort of third-party reporting centres. What our research shows, and other research backs this up as well, is there's still a significant problem of trust and confidence within the police amongst some groups.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.